Hello, I'm Helena Clayton, and alongside my work in organisational and leadership development as a coach and as a facilitator, I've had a long-standing interest in love and the role that it could and arguably should play in organisations. So in this series of conversations, I'm going to be talking to some people who share that interest, some from the corporate world, but not all by any means. We have an Everest explorer and an academic for you to hear from. And together we'll be talking about what difference more love might make in organisations. What do we mean by love in a secular, in a workplace sense? What blocks and enables love to flow? And perhaps more importantly, or most importantly, what are acts of leadership that are acts of loving leadership? So there'll be some more details about where to find more information at the end of this session. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side. So, hi there. Today I'm delighted to be talking with Toby Lindsay. Now, Toby and I worked together at Roffey Park for many years, and now we find ourselves working together, but I work as an associate with Toby. So our relationship continues. And Toby had picked up on the fact that I had become super interested in this phrase, deepened by diminishment. I'd written about it, and I think it comes from the work of Stephen Jenkinson. But this phrase kind of caught me and wouldn't let me go. So I wrote about it, and I've been thinking a lot about it. And so has Toby, it turns out, because Toby's PhD is not unconnected to that phrase and these notions at all. So it felt like a really great conversation to have, just seeing what we could talk about together on the phrase deepened by diminishment. And for me, I'm curious about what do we mean by diminishment? What diminishes us? How does it feel to be diminished? But also, what do we mean by deepened? And how do we do that? And of course, I'm always interested in how all of this links with love and how that shows up in organizations. So, yeah, Toby, just great to be in a room with you, especially talking about this topic. So, yeah, hi, welcome.
Hi, Helena. Thank you. Yeah, really great. And I just sort of Roffey Park. I met you when I was a student on the MSc, and you were running. I think it was the off. It's not Ofqual, but it's a model of development and growth. And then we worked together there. And I'm just thinking that those two points are quite significant, because when I was there studying, I describe myself as an entrepreneur and teacher. I was running a pretty successful group of companies, traveled to Roffey Park in quite a nice Mercedes, and wore a Rolex watch, which changed in the subsequent years. So that's kind of bookmarking something that certainly I experienced as a diminishment, which is into the PhD. But just very lovely to recognise actually now that, yeah, we met over a decade ago. We've worked together in different ways. We continue to work together, and we're having this conversation today, which is really lovely.
And I'm just smiling because I didn't know about the Mercedes and the Rolex. I love that, and I'm sure we'll talk about why that's different. Yeah. So maybe I wonder if you'd start by saying something about your PhD inquiry and why deepened by diminishment resonates with what you're currently exploring through that.
Yeah, sure. So my PhD inquiry title is The Enduring Effects of Bankruptcy on My Organizational Development Practice. And the objectives are to really understand bankruptcy, what it is, and get under the skin of it. And I become aware in my thinking and writing that bankruptcy has been part of my life since I was very, very young. One of the games that I first learned how to play and learned how to win most of the time was Monopoly. And in Monopoly, you lose when you go bankrupt. Ironically, Monopoly was created as a game to show the the kind of failings of capitalism, but it became a game that was loved by people who wanted to win by bankrupting others. I was reading a book, I think really a book about deep sea ships anyway, but the first page it says, and you went down to the port and they were bankrupt, and you realize that, oh, so we use bankrupt is used in language to describe something, to evoke something, and seemingly with great ease. So it makes me think, oh gosh, we sort of culturally have an understanding of what it means to be bankrupt, whether that be technically, financially, morally, ethically. So that's, it's there, and yet I found that there's really very little in the literature about the impact of bankruptcy, the experience of bankruptcy, what it is as a sort of social and cultural phenomena, because it is a way of both ending something and beginning something anew. It releases us in some way from being in a very difficult position, but it also puts us under a load of constraints. And bankruptcy is something that we never recover from, because this is my story, because I am a discharged bankrupt. So I have been discharged from the container of bankruptcy, but I remain a discharged bankrupt for the rest of my life. And so the PhD is a real inquiry into my experience of bankruptcy. It was not long after graduating my MSc, in fact, it was the following year, that the businesses that we ran had come to be in such a position that we made the choice to, following the death and suicide of my business partner, to close. And we closed, and then over a period of a couple of years, I realized that my kind of biggest fear, that I would go into bankruptcy, was unavoidable, actually. In fact, I went to the High Court because a creditor was trying to take control of our home, and bankruptcy was the only option, just to sort of simply. And at the time at the time of closing the businesses, I was also teaching at Sussex University, and went to see Professor Story, who had been someone I'd cited in my MSc, and said, "Oh, we're colleagues, Professor Story, so nice to meet you," and told him what was going on in my life. And he very kindly and gently said, "I suggest you kind of write this down. How shall I say this to maybe better express it later, or express it more clearly later, because it's quite a crazy time." But I kept a log. So what I have as data is a log of my kind of personal writing over the period of putting businesses into administration, multiple court appearances, trying to kind of avoid bankruptcy, having to disclose to people I was working with that I might go bankrupt, then going bankrupt, and then going through it. So the PhD looks at that data, and really, rather than kind of trying to go do an archival walk through it, it looks at that data and looks at me and my practice in organizational development now, thinking about things like the use of self, and my impact and presence, and asking questions about what the enduring nature of bankruptcy, which literally means to be broken. It comes from Italian, broken bench. When a moneylender could no longer pay their debts, they broke the bench they work from. So it's really exploring some ideas about being broken, and how that endures through practice.
Oh, wow, so many layers to that, so many layers. And it would be easy, I think, for me, it is easy to assume that the experience of bankruptcy would be one that is diminishing. But that's so simplistic, right? So from where you've started exploring so far, how would you relate diminishment to your experience of bankruptcy?
I think I mean, so diminishment, we've been in coming into this conversation thinking about, what does diminishment mean, and it certainly means loss. I guess that's one of the things I'm thinking. So and certainly there, so the material loss comes very quickly. We the Mercedes, and before declaring bankruptcy, material assets, jewelry, Mercedes, Rolexes, were all sold, and were all sold for cash, at times to buy presents for children. at Christmas. And so you get very quickly realize what priorities are. I think there's probably a connection to love there, certainly. But there's this material loss, which goes very quickly. Bankruptcy then means that all of one's assets are no longer controlled by the self. They are declared to the official receiver. So there's the diminishment in terms of no longer having control over material assets or financial affairs, bank accounts, loans. You can't borrow more than £100 without having to declare it. That would be from a friend. Or so there's also this declaration. There's this vulnerability that there's a scrutiny of one's affairs that is a legal requirement. And I think that has a diminishing, it's interesting to think of that has a very diminishing feel and quality to it. It certainly did. It feels, I used to kind of describe feeling as if my skin was being peeled off with a tin opener, how peeled back with it like a can of fish, this kind of ripping open, rawness of experience. And then sort of bound up in all of my experience of the last 10 years is shame and real fear that, and this is, more located in some really sort of unpleasant blogs written by people who just write unpleasant things about the industry I was in. However, they really kind of connected to that and have this real fear of, again, it's exposure. What if people see in? What if people see that? What if I'm recognized to be shitty, unpleasant? So that's all a part of it. And then they kind of, there's something about kind of identity. Identifying as a bankrupt meant that were somebody to say to me, oh, well, you don't want to do that because it'll affect your credit file, I'd sort of laugh it off and say, well, my credit file's ruined. So, but then that's kind of a place I sort of located myself in as being a bit of not having access to certain resources, being a bit outside, being a bit and kind of almost kind of sort of made use of that, but also felt a bit crap about it.
Wow, and I'm really struck by the metaphor, right, about being peeled open, and that rawness and the shame of being seen in that rawness.
Yeah.
Very painful. It sounds very, very painful. And the first word you used, of course, was loss. That diminishment is perhaps primarily about loss, and my sense is we don't have that much skill, comfort, experience, amongst us generally in talking about loss or processing it, or I don't know, engaging with it.
Yeah. I mean, immediately as you said that, I sort of thought, loss of status. That the loss of status, loss of resource, loss of capability. Not which immediately I think of perhaps the superficial, but being able to provide, get around a drink, all the kinds of things, struggling, being able, and loss of dignity, being with colleagues checking into a hotel and realizing that, oh no, I do have to pay the hotel bill in advance and I don't have the capacity to do that. And it was a colleague who we both know who said, oh, I can cover it. And that makes me feel great. And it makes me feel rubbish. And kind of, it's a loss and there's a grief and there's a process of going through that has layers and iterations. And I say, and have said all the way through it, I kind of wouldn't change what happened. But, loss and grief, I think, are my experience of them is, that there is value deepening that comes through those processes.
So let's start to pick up on that deepening word. So it's not something you would have skipped in experience-wise, because there were gifts maybe that came from it. It allowed you to deepen it allowed you to deepen. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. So I was thinking about deepening when starting to think about having this conversation. I was thinking, oh, yeah, depth. So it just struck me that very often I think of depth as a if I conceptualize depth, it's going down in a three-dimensional space, the depth of the pool, but it could be the depth of the field. And then I was thinking, well, actually, if we think about the universe, those dimensions are only things that we construct because of our relativity to the planes we're on. So depth goes in multi-dimensions. So I was like, well, if you had a signpost that pointed you in the direction of depth, it would go everywhere. It would probably actually, think about it now, point back in on itself. So depth is, and I was reading your writing this morning and picked up on the word expansion. So I get to maybe, depth is about expansion. An expansion of what? Expansion of character. So the things that I think are expanded in loss, in coming to terms with loss, or in my experience of that, are things like emotional range, being able to, and connection with others, being able to really feel both pain, sadness, joy, hope together. Depth of awareness, that kind of, when experiencing something really difficult, I'm really aware of, reminded that other people experience things really terribly difficult, and much more so. What else is kind of deepened? Consciousness, hope, empathy, faith, things like that. So depth is an expansion of some really fundamental and profound things, I think.
Yeah. Yes, it's nice that you mentioned that, the kind of multidimensional expansion. I was talking with a colleague this morning. We were talking about a retreat she's scoping out, a women's retreat to explore eldership. What does it mean to really step into eldership as a woman? So we were talking similarly. Actually, it's about the theme of how do we not let our life get small, and how do we stay as expanded as we can as we age. And that's one of the things we were talking about. This kind of we're talking in our second half of life, or the third of life, more about this kind of inner expansion, which felt, as we were talking about an infinite expansion. How can we deepen our capacity for compassion, for love, for help, for support, for understanding, for tolerance, and we were sort of playing with the idea that that's kind of infinite. And this conversation is really reminding me of how inevitably that comes from difficult times in some way.
Yeah. I was thinking, I think it probably comes also from, I was thinking before this morning, I was thinking, is it just that? And I think it's probably also from really wonderful and good. And I don't think you can have either without the other. And I think the value is both. And certainly when thinking about diminishment, I was reading, do you know Merlin Sheldrake's book, Entangled Life?
The
mushroom book.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just about how much is going on that we can't see, and how entangled all life is, and how these organisms are felted. I love that word, felted into each other. The idea of and symbiotic relationships. And I was reading a bit recently on decomposition, but it struck me about that as life decomposes, then the nutrients get taken by this system of interconnected mycelial network mushrooms, and gets spread around the whole. So that, in a very kind of fundamental and fundamental way, is life is the diminishment of life is also about it becoming part of the wholeness of life.
So then, do you think, so the idea of deepened by diminishment, it sounds like, with the kind of mushroomy felting, for us as people, there's something about, there's a natural deepening that happens as we age or mature, perhaps. I wonder if you think there are things that we can consciously or actively do to support that deepening. Perhaps it's a natural thing. Are there also things we can do for ourselves? or for others?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think there are, certainly, when you think about physical and the physical health and kind of, we do that, don't we? When we kind of train or walk or kind of increase our fitness, we're actually doing it by putting our bodies under stress. We diminish and then we expand. So that I find more and more that I want to be in processes of kind of pushing and physically kind of exerting myself to sort of, you just feel there's a bit of a link, and then diminish a bit and then expand a bit. I think that it just feels like there's something about the more and more we allow ourselves to be present and in the moment and kind of paradoxically sort of aware of as much as possible, expanded into as much as possible, not kind of thinking about it too much. I think that helps. I don't know. What do you think? I'm wondering about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of some of the literature on eldership and maturing, and there's a view that says, maturity and wisdom don't automatically come as givens as we age. Likewise, something that diminishes us doesn't necessarily deepen us, perhaps. So there's something about, if wisdom doesn't necessarily come with age, which I'd agree with. It's like, how can we cultivate, fertilize, if we're talking mushrooms, what is the compost? What are the nutrients that could just increase the chances of us being a little bit wiser, as well as a little bit older? And I'm torn, because there's something about, if there is a spectrum between making things happen and letting things happen, I'm a bit hardwired to the making things happen end. And part of my journey, if you like, is to get much more okay with just letting things happen. So I'm not necessarily, kind of pushing for like really hard practices that could cultivate deepening, but I am curious to see what we might be a bit more intentional about to encourage deepening or wisdom practices, deepening, but yeah, something like that. And I'm thinking, actually, as you speak, that meditation is probably a core practice, right? There's something about, you said, the more we can stay connected to what is, good and bad. So that would be an example.
I think, I mean, if we are sort of defended against and avoidant to sort of our pain and suffering, and I think sometimes that's really necessary. So sort of, because however that kind of the learning that might come from feeling what we feel, and being human, we're going to feel the whole gamut of human emotion, and because I think it's frightening. I'm thinking about leadership now, and about kind of people with great expertise being in positions of leadership, and actually the diminishment of the feeling of competence as you go into more senior leadership being necessary, in my belief, to actually really understand what your role is as a leader, rather than holding to I need to be expert, I need to be in control, I need to have power. Well, power, I think there is great power in letting go of control and so on. So practices that can help, I think, are kind of things that allow us to open up to some of our vulnerabilities and losses and griefs and pains, and share that with others, and feel it together, and then recognize that beyond that, I think, comes hope and some wisdom and insight.
Yeah. So creating space to welcome in the difficult feelings, really validate them, honor them, to say, yeah, that's expected. It would be. I was talking with somebody, a coaching client, about imposter syndrome, and she said, I'm in a newly senior promoted role, and I feel, fearful and like I shouldn't be here and a fraud. And we were talking about the fact that, if you didn't, that would be a bit strange. Because this is such an extraordinary step up. That's natural. So I think there's something about welcoming that stuff in.
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking about sort of my experience and thinking, so what I found myself thinking is, and I was lucky that it was so powerfully profound and kind of, I kind of really had to feel it, because otherwise,
yeah,
it was just really there for quite a long period of time, still is, keeps coming around, keeps iterating. And because I'm fortunate enough to have have a practice of curiosity and inquiry, and people who encourage me in that way and support me, and when I have shared experiences, value it and say, let's have a conversation like you've done here. So it was, because it was almost like it was a big enough of a diminishment to actually really lean into it and learn from it. And I think I've recently gone for a new role and found myself again experiencing that. Oh gosh, what if I get exposed? What if it gets seen? And this time, so I think you go round things a number of times, was saying, oh, what am I doing with this experience? What is this what am I choosing to do? And choosing to kind of, in a way, avoid what was being said, which is, we think you're great, we want you, come and work with us. Because this was after I'd been offered a role, and was thinking, oh, what if people find out? And it's kind of, I was almost avoiding accepting, what the world might see an offer to be. And kind of, in a way, I think there's a link there to love, and how, when we're really in a place of diminishment, when my experience is, when I'm feeling really, really crappy, and then I'm able to recognize that I'm loved and that receive love, and really kind of resonate with Richard Rohr, who we both read's words, that we're not loved because we're good, we manage to be good because we're loved. That the kind of expansion that's possible is achieved through being loved, allowing love, and that diminishment is a really powerful way of really recognizing that love is not conditional, that it's there for all of us. And I think that's so then to think, well, how might we access it? How might we help? How might we create conditions where that's helped access? I mean, couldn't you have kind of do that work? And I've tried it a few times, of contracting and creating safety and trust amongst people to share experiences, and just let some of that come through.
Yes, and hearing you talk there, I'm reminded too of Kristin Neff and her work on self-compassion. She her latest book, Fierce Compassion, is
I've seen that a bit.
Taking it out from self-compassion is super important, but also we need a compassion that is for the world, for other people, to protect, to fight for. So it's a really timely, beautiful book. But reading it's reminding me that the more it's often said that we have to be loving the world, we have to start with ourselves. But she really brings it home for me, because so the more self-compassion we can have for the feelings that come up from diminishment, for example, then the more compassion we can have for other people's diminishments. So it kind of it allows us then to be more loving and tender and compassionate of other people's diminishments, which are potentially exquisitely painful for them. So it's how do we sort of so it's a lovely bridge, from being super caring for ourselves so that we can be super caring for others.
Which I think, that the expansion of our ability to care comes through, and that, I think that's right. Those horrible, difficult, unpleasant feelings that we could kind of then, and I'm feeling that again, and why? I actually go, you just have a tenderness towards it, and say, oh, bless you. That's hard. That's difficult. And then offer that to sort of everyone, really. And have that compassion, that understanding that people's behavior could well be linked to really difficult, horrible feelings that they're really struggling with, and And that's a starting point.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, Toby, I'm really hearing you draw the lessons isn't quite right, but from your own experience of being broken, bankruptcy and brokenness, and really sort of again harvesting the learning from that and the experiences. And what is making me wonder is, can we be deepened by diminishment as it's happening, or do you think it needs a necessary period of time for time to pass, for reflection, for the world to do a few turns? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's all very interesting, isn't it? That kind of makes me think about what we think time is, which is kind of a linear process that goes across. But I'm not sure. And how real or illusory that is. So, and then sort of, and sort of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets is important to me and has been, and that deals a lot with the nature of time and the reality of there being any reality other than the present moment. And so the past echoes in the present. Is the future foretold? Well, I think I'm trying to say, and I was thinking earlier that my interest in Falling Upwards, Richard Rohr, certainly appears way back in the decade that I'm describing, or even, and probably T.S. Eliot beforehand. And so my consolidating of experience is probably happening more now, knitting it together, understanding it. I would say that as I do that, I recognize that, oh gosh, I was really interested in that book then. And I was standing in my kitchen feeling like my skin was being peeled off with a peeler, looking at sharp objects and feeling really horrible. So I'd say, in a long kind of answer, yes. I think both the kind of sense of what's happening, when it's happening, and how it relates to other things is it. I don't feel it's as necessarily sort of trackable across time as we might think. And then I think that there are things that are happening and we may not be recognizing them, yet they are happening. So yeah, I'd say yes. However, it may well not feel like it. And maybe the process of expanding is a painful one anyway, because it's disturbing as well.
And there's stuff, isn't there? And I'll dig out the reference about, I think it comes from Kristen Neff's work, or at least she refers to it, about when we sit and write out our stories of painful or difficult or traumatic experiences. When we write them out, the pain of it eases. So there's something really therapeutic about revisiting a difficult or painful time today in order to kind of look back and make sense of it. Yeah,
and there's quite a lot of literature in certainly literature around entrepreneurial failure, which I read quite a lot of, have looked at, about, but draws on that, on the references, that kind of work, that it's when we can look back at experience without, not necessarily without feeling the emotional connection with it, but with feeling it and being able to not be overwhelmed by the feeling of it, which I think is exactly what I was relates to talking about, feeling that experience of shame and fear, of scrutiny, and being able to say, and what is this and what is happening, as opposed to feeling it and being overwhelmed by the sickness of feeling it and very terrified of it. So getting to points where we can reflect back, not be overwhelmed by the emotional, and do some inquiry and think about it and then learn, which I do think that is something that happens over iterative cycles through time.
And even though in the moment, right, we've brought in leadership. If I think of coaching, the such importance of a leader being able to step off the treadmill and reflect, come up into the balcony and look down or back at something that's happened and make sense of it with a much more kind of neutral person. Just the value of that in a week, while something is live and happening, is so important. Thinking of the kind of time element, it's like, well, actually we can do this work together while it's happening with good support.
Yeah, it's that, I think you're creating different quality of space in temporal progression, but we can create the spaces where we come out. And if I think Michael, the spaces of, and those spaces seem to be sort of closer together. They have a relationship that isn't separated by large periods of time. They sit in a kind of, it's like an antechamber to time where you can go in and go, and this is a different quality. And then you go out of it and progress, and then you go back to it. And it's almost like, it's not there in the future. It's there. It exists in a different dimension. Yeah.
I love that. Coaching is an antechamber of time.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's a nice. And those spaces. So that kind of are there things we can do? I think we do them. I think there are lots of things we do, aren't there, to create places where we can be together and hold and share, but not be overwhelmed by our difficulties, to then do some work around learning. And I think that learning is maybe deepening.
Yeah. And the phrase that comes up, which is very topical with complexity and vertical development, which is about meaning making. How do we make meaning of something? How do we make meaning together? How do I make new meaning of something? So there's something that I've not connected with before about the importance of versions of a story, new meaning, in order to expand, actually, to see different ways of looking at something.
Yeah, I suppose. I think that, so that creative process of constructing new stories, collectively sharing, facilitating, enabling, creating new meaning. Because if there is new meaning, new story, then something is expanded. There is more, because it's a creative process, which is pretty cool.
I like that. Toby, I'm just looking at time, actually, and probably time to bring this conversation to a close. So how would you like to close this conversation?
Well, I just like to, I'm looking at a kind of a meadow of yellow buttercups, which is bordered by loads of roses, and they're blowing in the wind, but they're not getting blown over. So that's what I'd say. It's been a very beautiful time. I'm really grateful for having the conversation, and it'll be really helpful in my work. And I also feel like it's kind of, just sort of a bit touched on a lot of things, but there's a lot more to explore. Yeah,
beautiful. Thank you. And I hope I know we will keep exploring it. And where it's taken me is, it's said that the gateway emotion for love is joy. So joy is the gateway emotion for love. But I'm also and I really get that, but there's something for me too about how might diminishment be a gateway experience to love. I think that's what this conversation is making me wonder about now.
I think that is really important too, because I think some of the most profoundly useful experiences I have had have been being aware of feeling loved when I felt at my most diminished.
Beautiful. Toby, thank you so much. And
you're really welcome.
I'm looking forward to more conversations with you on this subject.
Yeah, likewise, Helen.
Good. All right. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
So I hope you found something of interest there and things to stimulate your thinking. For more information, head over to my website, helenaclayton.co.uk. There you'll find the show notes from this conversation, plus links to my blog page, a way to sign up to my newsletter, my Leading from Love program, and a lot more. and drop me a line, find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, of course. It would be great to connect with you that way too. Okay, bye for now.